Hello and welcome to the Holyrood Sources podcast, where we take you inside Scottish politics. I'm Calum Macdonald. Hello. And this is Geoff Aberdein, who was Chief of Staff to the First Minister Alex Salmond. Hello, Geoff.
Good morning.
And Andy Maciver, who was Director of Communications for the Scottish Conservatives. Hello, Andy.
Hello.
Technology has not been our friend this morning, but it's fine. You would never know. Right, coming up on the podcast today then, we are going to begin a series actually with candidates from across the country ahead of the election. Today we'll be hearing from the Highlands and Islands, we'll be hearing from Angus, we'll be hearing from Edinburgh, and this is the first in a series that we'll do over the course of the next few weeks leading up to election day. So stay with us for that. Plus we've got Ailsa Henderson, who is from the University of Edinburgh but also runs the Scottish Election Study and Survey. She will be with us to break down some of the data that she's been seeing over these last couple of months as well. We've also got a couple of your messages to get through. We've got a shocking one from Richard. Thanks all for your valuable insights as we approach the election, says Richard. I have a quick comment on Andy. I completely agree with the brief discussion on reforming Scotland's voting system. With almost 3 decades of devolution, it's time to review Holyrood's democratic foundations. Wales addressed its additional member system, albeit with a system where voter choice is limited through the closed list, and Scotland should too. Switching to STV or an open list PR system would require 2/3 of MSPs to vote for it, but Wales shows change is possible. So there you go. And also Marion's been in touch from Glasgow, suggesting that we hear from Dr. Gillis Baylett, I think is how you would say his surname, space technology lecturer at Glasgow University, who is excited about the prospect of achieving things that are ambitious and cool projects, apparently. He's been talking about space technology in Scotland. This is in response to an episode we did a few weeks ago about whether Scotland's a good place to start a business or not. So Marion suggested we hear from Dr. Baylett on his enthusiasm for Scotland. So we'll try and do that. Thank you. Your suggestions are very welcome on what you'd like to hear us talking about, or indeed who you'd like to hear us talking to. You can WhatsApp us on 0333 404 6507. Right, before we get to Ailsa and before we get to our candidates, let's just tick off a few of the events of the week this week. And we have to start, don't we, with the situation in the Middle East, and I suppose the impact of it on us. The global economy is, I suppose, somewhat holding its breath as the Strait of Hormuz remains effectively closed. 20% of the world's oil and LNG is frozen in place as a result. Oil prices are up. You've probably noticed the difference if you've been filling your car with petrol or diesel already. Analysts are warning that this is going to be one of the most volatile energy eras ever. Geoff, I think we should just sort of consider the position of the industry at a moment like this, when markets are volatile, prices are changing, and people are worried.
Yeah, they certainly are, and understandably so. I know we're just going to be brief, but I'm going to run through a few points, and it's worth remembering that, that today, over 70% of the UK's total energy demand is still met by oil and gas. That's not going to change anytime soon. We want to see the transition to renewables, as I've talked about many times before, but it ain't going to happen overnight. It would be nice if the Secretary of State, Ed Miliband, kind of reflected the fact that this is one of the biggest and most important industries in his brief. It seems to be he's trying to pit oil and gas against renewables at every opportunity. That's really unfortunate. In terms of the industry itself, there was good discussions with the Chancellor last week where she confirmed that she would take off this energy profits levy, the windfall tax, and it's just a question of when she does. Now, there's a few myths out there saying, oh, this is not the right time to take off a windfall tax. Look at all the money they're taking. Please, people, read up on this, because what the industry is proposing after extensive consultation with the government is simply to put in place the government's own oil and gas price mechanism. And what that does essentially is it reflects when prices are high, then the additional windfall tax will be employed. And when it's not, it will come off essentially. That's a simplistic way of describing it. Whereas we've had a windfall tax for 4 years, 3 of which there was no windfall to be had, and yet they're still getting paid at this exorbitant 78% tax. What's that's done? That's reduced our production, that's cost lots and lots of jobs, as we well know, and of course increased our reliance on imports, carbon-heavy imports, many imports, incidentally, that were anticipated to take from Qatar, as was publicised recently. If we have a much more stable long-term regime, you'll have a lot more investment. And I believe the industry will be making that very, very clear that should this new mechanism come in place for 2027, they will come to the table with significant multi-billion-pound investment. That makes sense, guys. We need this stuff. Let's produce as much of it as we can from here.
Andy, I want to put to you the sort of other part of the conversation, which is whether the government should be intervening at a time like this to help consumers and what an intervention could or should look like to try to stabilise things. Do you think that would be appropriate and politically, savvy?
Well, I think that's a very interesting question because one of the important things when we look at, we're all going to face another increase in energy costs. We get that. And there are aspects of that we can't do much about because it's traded on international markets, and therefore there's not much we can do about the price. There's a lot we can do about security of it, as Geoff has said. There's not much we can do about the price, about the wholesale price of the energy. But let us remember that that only makes up about half of the energy bill. The rest of your energy bill is made up of non-wholesale price components. Made up of government policy is what the rest of it is made up of. That's why our energy bills are so much more expensive than everybody else in Europe. So as government interventions go, you could go for a sort of COVID-style intervention where you borrow again to the hilt and give people money, which is not a good idea and has not proven to be a good idea since COVID, not least because it's put the national debt up to completely unsustainable levels. Or what you could do is invoke a little bit of the spirit of COVID, whereby, during that time, people said there was nothing that was undoable during COVID, right? People started things from a blank sheet of paper and said, what can we do right now really quickly to make various situations better? We could do that again with energy bills. There isn't anything stopping the UK government from looking at the components of an energy bill and starting again from a blank sheet of paper. So let's not have us believe that our energy prices going up is only because of the situation in the international markets. That's got a part to play, but it's not the only part we've got to play in that. So if the government really want to do something, sit down, interrogate every single part of what makes up an energy bill and work out whether all of it is actually necessary or not. I think that is what a good government intervention in this would look like.
Yeah, fair. Right, we've got lots to get through, but I just wanted to mention that I love that our listeners to this podcast are all over the world. We had this message from David in Abu Dhabi. Now, it was in response to something I posted on Twitter, which is a screen grab of the UK government's official travel advice for going to the UAE. And the screen grab says, it is illegal to post material, including videos and photographs online that is critical of the UAE government, companies or individuals, or which relate to incidents in the UAE. And I tweeted saying, I really value the input of residents of Dubai jumping to defence of the UAE government. Such important contributions given to do otherwise is, in fact, illegal, as per the UK government's travel advice. Now, David got in touch to say, Calum must be having a laugh with this tweet, surely. Taken literally, his point appears to suggest that it's illegal not to go online and praise the government, which is obviously nonsense. I am a Scot who has lived in the Gulf for the past 13 years, including here in the UAE, and the idea that residents only say positive things about the authorities because the law somehow forces them to is frankly just a lazy caricature. People here are perfectly capable of forming their own views about how the authorities handle particular situations, and we all have the option of simply not posting. At the moment, the reality is that the country has been dealing with daily missile and drone attacks more than any of its neighbours. Many residents, UK expats included, are simply grateful that the UAE authorities have taken the security situation incredibly seriously and have done a frankly outstanding job protecting the population under the circumstances. It's entirely possible to think a government's handled a specific crisis well without endorsing every aspect of its policies. Reducing every supportive comment from residents to, they have to say that because it's illegal not to, is terrible analysis and just comes across as dismissive and supercilious. There are plenty of us here, Calum. Why not actually try speaking with one of us and find out what's really going on? Says David in Abu Dhabi. I'm very glad to reflect your message, David. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you for getting in touch. Right, let's have a little look now at Anna Sarwar's campaigning techniques next. This week he published a video with the caption, "For me, Glasgow is the best city in the world. It's time we had a First Minister from Glasgow for Glasgow." Here's a part of that video.
And let's be honest, the SNP's plan for Glasgow has been simple. Manage the decline, blame someone else, repeat. Well, actually, I'm not interested in managing decline. Glasgow doesn't need sympathy, it needs leadership. So here's what I'll do as First Minister. A proper city centre regeneration plan not just another press release. I'll clean up Glasgow streets and public spaces so people actually want to come back into the city. Reform business rates so local shops aren't punished while online giants rake it in. And more police officers on our streets, because people don't shop, eat or socialise where they don't feel safe. And this is the thing about Glasgow. It's the city that built the ships, that built the world. We're not a city that accepts decline. Glasgow doesn't need managed decline, it needs a government that actually believes in it. We are not a city that accepts decline. We rebuild, we reinvent, and we come back stronger. I'm ready to fix the SNP's mess, get the basics right, and build a better future for Glasgow. So on May the 7th, vote for a First Minister from Glasgow, for Glasgow.
Geoff, can you see the strategy in this?
No, I don't. No, perfectly good video and narrative, but he's not running to be the Mayor of Glasgow. He's running to be the First Minister of Scotland. And, I think we've given him a really good fair shake on this in this podcast in recent weeks and months, but I think that's a real misstep from my perspective. John Swinney would not be doing that video for Perth, would he, in comparison? And the one thing that really bugs me as an Aberdonian, frankly, and I'm sure it'll be bugging a lot of people out with Glasgow and the Central Belt, is we've always had this fear that, there's a Central Belt bias. And I tell you, I've been in government and I've seen it at play. It's not a malicious thing. It's not a deliberate thing. What it is a lot of civil servants that have never been out with the M8 corridor. And I'm just a bit disappointed that he feels, and I know why he's doing it, because he needs to shore up his vote in Glasgow, but he needs list votes to mount a serious challenge. He needs lots of list votes around the country. And I get the point. He's a Glasgow boy, get it, and all the rest of it, fine. But your aspirations should be much higher, I think. And I think it doesn't play well for me at all.
Strikes me as a sort of video, Andy, that you would show at a sort of local constituency, a local Labour Party constituency event or something to kind of G up local people. He is an MSP for Glasgow, that sort of idea. This is perhaps one of those things which has gone onto social media with the best intentions. And by the way, for what it's worth, it's like a well-made video. It's catchy, it looks good, it sounds good, etc. But actually, that obviously the audience is far greater than just your local constituency members. What do you think of it?
I when I looked at it, I got why. I'm not saying I agree with the strategy, but I know what the strategy is, which is that Labour are not looking to come a strong second here. Labour, and this is what was all behind all the Keir Starmer stuff, Labour are looking to win the election. And their view is that they can only win the election by winning constituencies. So despite Geoff saying they need to get more votes on the list, and I agree fundamentally with that, because it gives them a better chance of having a stronger showing, their view is they have to win constituencies to get to where they want to get to, which is winning the election. And winning constituencies en masse means winning constituencies in the Central Belt, and particularly the west side of the Central Belt. So I get why there was that sort of focus on it. In terms of whether that's the right audience for it, well, if you are in Aberdeen or Inverness or further afield in a remote rural area, is that what you want your First Minister to be saying? No, I mean, it probably isn't, let's face it, is it? But, they are where they are, and that's the area of the country they think they need to win, and not win list seats, but win constituency seats. And if you look at it at face value from that point of view, you begin to understand why he made that video. I'm not saying I agree with it, I'm just saying I think that's why they've done it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. I mean, I know why he's done it. I just wouldn't have done it. I mean, I think a First Minister for Scotland candidate should speak to all of Scotland, and I think that just kind of belies where they are and where they feel they need to really pick a foes. I think also shows a little bit of, their data must show that it's really eeksy-peeksy, and I think most polls show that. So they need to pick up these constituencies. But I make my point again. If they're going to be successful, you said they're not looking to run a close second, they're looking to win the election. To win the election, they're going to need list seats. And if you keep going on like this, and I don't suspect he will, but if you keep going on like this, you'll just get people going, sod off. I'm not voting for somebody that's just basically there to trumpet Glasgow. And
Do you
that's
know what I
not
did?
just in Aberdeen and Inverness. It's in the Borders. It's in Lothians. It's in Perthshire. It's in the Islands. It's a really careful one. I think you've got to be careful path you've got to tread if you're going to do that. Wouldn't
Do you
advise
know
it.
what I don't like? And this is not an Sarwar's fault because everybody does it, but it grates all the time. The exceptionalism. You know, Glasgow's the greatest city in the world. Scotland's the greatest country in the world. No, it's not. I mean, who thinks that? Really? Do people in Glasgow think they live in the best city in the world? I bet they don't. But if you polled Glaswegians and said, is Glasgow the best city in the world, you wouldn't get good ratings coming back from that. Glasgow's got a lot of problems, as we'll see in a second in some of the data we're going to look at from the IFS. Scotland's got a lot of problems too. If we keep telling ourselves we're the best in the world, that's actually a big barrier to us changing the things that need to be changed, because we are not the best country in the world. Very, very, very far from it.
Well, on that note, let's skip on to the Institute for Fiscal Studies analysis that was published this week. It's a busy podcast today. This analysis suggests that 5 years on from the height of the pandemic, there are signs of improvement in key Scottish public services, but, they say, performance remains substantially poorer than before the pandemic in the health service, in schools, and in court. This is despite substantial increases in spending. So the IFS says the number of hospital admissions and outpatient appointments is still below 2019 levels in Scotland, unlike in England and Wales. Performance in international PISA tests for 15-year-olds has been consistently falling, and it's been lower than in England since the early 2010s. And the gap between school absence rate in Scotland and England has grown since the pandemic. Andy, those are some of the top lines from this IFS data, which is crucial, surely, in an election campaign to understand the state of Scotland.
I think it's proving not to be crucial in this election campaign. For I suppose all the reasons that we know, and the reasons that we'll discuss in a second with Ailsa Henderson. Actually, they're proving not to be crucial in this election campaign because there's not a lot of sunlight being shone on them. But yeah, of course, I mean, they are important. I mean, the reality is, as the IFS report shows, we spend more per head of public expenditure than in England, and by the way, a lot more than comparable countries in Europe, a lot more per head than comparable countries in Europe, and we get poor outcomes for it. We get poorer outcomes in health, we get massively, demonstrably poorer outcomes in education, as the PISA studies show. And, not dissimilar to what I just said about the Glasgow and Scotland thing. If you don't admit there's a problem, then you can't go about fixing it. And we've got massive problems in our public services. Our public services are not short of cash. They are very badly run. That is the problem. Not short of cash, they're just extremely badly run. And this narrative, which has been perpetuated by political parties, all political parties, including those from the centre-right, for a number of years now, which is that the way to fix the NHS or the way to fix education or the way to fix whatever you want is to plough more money into it, has been so comprehensively disproven over 25 years that we really have to think about another way.
What then of this critique that too many people are kind of working from home, Andy? This is another thing that's kind of gone a bit viral online this week. Neil O'Brien, the Conservative MP for Harborough, Oadby and Wigston, who knew that was a real place, posted a thread on X this week about the civil service, and it caught your eye.
So that was his thread was about, he'd done an analysis of sickness rates across all government departments in the UK, and it included the Scottish Government in one of them. And allied to that, there's also reporting today after an appearance by the Permanent Secretary at Holyrood yesterday, which is about working from home and Scottish Government staff ignoring guidance about coming back to the office. Again, this is an area where we have a problem which is demonstrably bigger than other parts of the UK. So effectively, the Scottish Government has the worst sickness rates of any large UK department. And obviously in London it's broken down by different departments, but the Scottish Government is the worst by some distance. And then, as I say, allied to that, Joe Griffin, who's an excellent Permanent Secretary, I think, and has a really, really building a really good senior team around him as well, was detailing yesterday how effectively they can't enforce the directive for people to work from the office because the staff are basically just refusing, and obviously they have the unions on their side citing all sorts of particular issues, basically allowing them to refuse to come to work and come to the office. Now, you've got a really good minister in charge of this, and Ivan McKay. John Swinney himself has made clear that he thinks there needs to be more people working from the office because of the huge problems with productivity. And you've got a really good high-level senior civil service team with Joe Griffin and those directors general underneath him. The problem with that is you can have a really shiny, great-looking car, but if you don't have a decent engine underneath it, it's not going to go. And the engine is not working in Scotland. The engine of the civil service underneath that level, who are supposed to be producing the goods, are not doing it because they're not productive. Sometimes they're often not present, and of course they're often not working at all because of very, very high sickness rates. We created this culture, I'm afraid, guys. We've been doing it for 10 plus years now, where in this country we have been so socially just that we have said to people, you know what, if you're not tip-top, if you're not 100%, don't worry about it. You don't need to work. It's fine. We've got this tremendous welfare system. We've got all these wonderful benefits that you can claim. Work is not the be-all and end-all because we've got welfare. Well, this is what happens.
Yeah.
Chickens have come home to roost.
Andy,
I think
thank you.
sorry. I think you're
Go on,
you're conflating a couple of issues though. There, this happened as a result of COVID and the immediate aftermath when we had the working from home, just to deal with that issue. Couldn't agree more. Incidentally, if we want our civil service to be more productive, they should work more in an office environment. Yes, it's great to have that flexibility when you need it, but working in an office environment with your colleagues is good for productivity. It's good for connections. It's ultimately good for your mental health and well-being because you're having that face-to-face interaction, something that we've sorely lost, in my opinion, when amongst our youngsters who had to be educated at home, and we've seen the impact of that on our relatives and our friends. So I do think there should be a strong case to be made for working more from from the office when you can, but have that flexibility when you can't, and I think that's a fair balance. In closing, I do think that Andy has touched on something that I don't entirely disagree with, but one thing we have to get back to is understanding that our civil service work for us as taxpayers. I totally appreciate the union position in protecting their workforce, their members, but fundamentally they work for us. And what would the vast majority of the public want? I suspect we know the answer.
Guys, thank you so much for now. Stay with us on the podcast. We've got Ailsa Henderson joining us. We've also got candidates from 3 political parties joining us on this episode of the Holyrood Sources podcast. We'll be right back. This is the Holyrood Sources podcast. Thank you so much for finding us. Of course, it's less than 2 months to go until the Scottish parliamentary election, so we're going to keep regularly checking on the campaign, the progress of it, what's being discussed, what isn't being discussed, and crucially how you are feeling about the election. Are you disillusioned? Are you very motivated to vote? Have you decided who you're going to vote for? Perhaps you're leaving it till the very last minute. Let's try and analyse some of that now with Ailsa Henderson, Professor of Political Science at the University of Edinburgh, who runs the Scottish Election Study. Ailsa, good morning. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to see you. So we've got a couple of months to go, and you are kind of, I suppose, trying to pick at the threads of stories in all of this campaigning. And I guess from your point of view, it seems that there are 2 parts of this. One, whether the SNP can do well following the 2024 general election, and of course the second is the rise of Reform UK. Just break those down a little bit for us, what you're looking for and what your analysis is suggesting.
Yeah. So whether the SNP can do well, I think yes, it can do well. I suppose one of the questions is why might it do better in this election than it did in 2024? And there's a number of reasons for that. First of all is that this is an election about a completely different legislature. And so there was a desire very much in 2024 to remove the Conservatives from office. And UK Labour was seen as the party best placed to do that. And so we know that people were treating that election not as a way to express your constitutional preferences, but as a way to make a statement about the UK government. And that's obviously no longer the case in this election. So there's a different relationship with your constitutional preferences and your party preferences. And we'd reached the point in 2021 when 90% of voters were casting a ballot for a party that aligns with their constitutional preferences. That fell substantially in 24 because people had different reasons for voting. But it's recovering, and we're now back up at about 85% alignment. So the SNP will do well. And one of the reasons for that is because we're back in the world where there's greater alignment between your constitutional preferences and your party preferences. The other thing you mentioned was reform. We're obviously looking at reform, and there are obvious reasons why reform might do well in a Scottish election. One of the first is that their key message is that there's something fundamentally wrong with the status quo. And that's a message that the Scottish electorate has been primed to receive, but by a different party. So the SNP has been saying this. We need fundamental change, radical change to the status quo to improve our lives and improve our governance. And so this is the same message that reform is making. They just have a different route to get there. So there's a familiar message that will help. We've been tracking issue salience over time. We know that many issues are flat in terms of how important they are to voters. But the single issue that's really increased in salience for voters is immigration. And so for a party that makes immigration and the control of immigration its most obvious most obvious policy, or the policy most people associate with reform, then reform clearly benefits from that. There are challenges there, but I can talk about those later.
Yeah, I think that would be good. On the immigration point, I want to reflect on that because I'm trying to work out if any of the, I suppose, in inverted commas, established Scottish parties have got an answer to what Reform UK are saying on immigration, and beyond that, whether it's cutting through. Reform UK are extremely effective at communicating basically all of their messages, to be honest, but on immigration specifically, that is something that lands, the idea of controlling immigration more tightly. And I just wonder if that is sort of forcing Scottish parties into territory that they've not really had to campaign on before.
No, it doesn't appear to. And one obvious reason for that is that immigration is reserved. So it's not a devolved competence of the Scottish Parliament. You would not expect parties to be campaigning in a Scottish Parliament election on how they would treat a reserved policy competence. So it doesn't appear to be nudging that. And if you look at, and it doesn't appear that voters or supporters of those parties want that either. So if you ask supporters of Labour or Conservatives or the SNP what their 5 most important issues are in this campaign, or you just look at the top 5 there, immigration isn't on the list for anybody except for supporters of reform. So yes, they're talking about immigration a lot. They're talking about a reserved competence a lot. They're not talking actually a lot about the devolved aspect that is within the Scottish Parliament's control. They're not talking about immigrant integration. And so it's not surprising that the other Scottish parties haven't jumped into action. One, for policy reasons, for competence reasons, it doesn't make sense. But also their supporters aren't pushing them to do so.
Yeah. I think what you say about the constitutional preference and party preference lining up speaks to something that Andy has been flagging, which is around, Andy, kind of support for the SNP, despite data and a track record that could be held up alongside it. They've been in power for so long, and the country's kind of consideration as to whether we're going in the right direction, I suppose. Andy, do you want to explain a bit more, and then we can get Ailsa's take?
The point that Ailsa made earlier on about this being a different type of election and therefore people vote effectively on more constitutional grounds, and that famous standing up for Scotland question that we've talked about a lot on this podcast before. But the thing that I find fascinating about it this time around, which I think is different, I mean, Ailsa, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think is different from previous elections, is that the SNP government is really pretty unpopular. And Ailsa's poll showed this, I think, in 2 different questions, because only a quarter of the country thought we were heading in the right direction. A similar proportion, only about a quarter, approve of the Scottish Government's record. And I thought a really interesting one in Ailsa's poll, actually, was that I think I'm right in saying 59% of people thought the economic situation had declined. But actually, more people blamed the Scottish Government for that than blamed the UK government for that, which I thought was really, really interesting. You combine all these things and you look at a situation where you say, this is a government which is actually not very popular, and perhaps hundreds of thousands of people will come out on May the 7th and vote for the SNP, despite the fact that those same people don't think the SNP are running a good government. Now, fair play to the SNP. I think that says more about the opposition than it does about the government. If the opposition is so bad that people who don't think the government are performing well feel no option but to vote for them again. That says a lot about the opposition, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the question has changed. So the question used to be, why is the SNP, well, the main question is, why is the SNP not paying the cost of governing? Every government there for a while starts to pay the costs of having been in power for a while, because you have to get twice as much right as wrong in order to just keep a level playing field, right? And so if you start to get policy decisions wrong, if you start to annoy people, then your approval rating falls dramatically. And so this cost of governing thing is baked into every single government. And the question has long been, why is the SNP not paying the costs of governing? But the variant of it that we used to have is, why are they still so popular when objectively we've got all kinds of policy failures that we can point to? But that's not the question now. The question is, why are people still voting for them if they're not popular? So we've had the two different bits falling away. And there's a number of things going on. First of all, we know that constitutional preferences matter. The support for independence floats the SNP at elections, and it gives it an automatic level of support. That's one thing. The second thing is that there is a constant game of comparison, both within Scotland and outside. So you have a constant comparison to the UK government. And even if you're not hitting any of your possible targets, even if the PISA scores for education are tanking, if you can say that you're performing better than the UK government, then you're actually doing all right, and you'll be able to attract support there. And the SNP has been fortunate in that for much of its time in office, it has had a deeply unpopular Conservative government in office in London, and now has a deeply unpopular Labour government in office. So that inherent comparison between a Scottish government and a UK government helps the SNP. The other is that there's a domestic comparison, and that's what Andy was talking about, in looking across the other Scottish parties. And for a long time, the key issue was, well, what's your answer to the Constitution? If you say the status quo is terrible and we need a radical change, what's your solution? For the SNP, the solution is independence. And there was never a compelling answer from any of the other parties on that constitutional question in terms of, well, what's your radical answer for how we're going to move forward? And we were primed at the time to believe that the solution could only be a constitutional one. And so that also has lent them a helping hand. So we've got these two implicit comparisons, one outside Scotland, one within Scotland, that keeps the SNP's head above water, basically.
It's really interesting. Really interesting. What about I suppose, any movement in the vote? Where are people's votes kind of changing? I think this was something else that Andy was picking up on, actually, that from compared to 2021, that votes are moving around to different parties.
Yeah, votes are moving around. I mean, the SNP vote's fairly sticky. They're managing to retain a fair amount of their support from 2021 and 2024. Labour's are going in multiple directions if we're looking at previous vote. And the other side of that is that Reform is picking up support from across the political spectrum. Obviously, the largest part of that is previous Conservative supporters, but it's not exclusively Conservative supporters. So that's the answer in terms of the flow of the vote from party to party. But I think equally interesting is if you start looking under the hood, and if you look at demographics, particularly if you look at gender crossed with age. What we can see for SNP support is that they are really losing support among younger women. And Reform is doing particularly well among older men, but also fairly well, 20%, I think, around the youngest men in our data set, the 16 to 24-year-olds. So we see a real gender difference if we're looking at the SNP and Reform. And you'll remember that for years, the SNP was more popular with men than it was with women. That obviously narrowed and then reversed when Nicola Sturgeon was first minister. But we're back in a situation where we've got a significant gender gap in SNP support, with men more supportive than women.
Interesting. Geoff?
Nothing really surprised me in the election study, I have to be honest. It kind of confirms a lot that's been in other polling. So I think one thing to remember is the SNP vote whatever it is in this election will be down significantly from 2021. So there's going to be a marked decline in their overall popularity. That's almost to be certain. The second thing is we use Survation at True North quite a lot in terms of testing people's attitudes on the handling of different devolved issues and competences. One thing I would say, and not in rebuttal, but just maybe seeking Ailsa's view, is that since John Swinney's taken over as First Minister, there has been an improvement. Still net negative approval ratings on issues, but there has been an improvement. And one thing that perhaps our polling doesn't take into consideration so much is personalities and people recognising that there's somebody else in charge. It's not Humza Yousaf anymore. It's not Nicola Sturgeon anymore. It's John Swinney. Maybe he should get another shotty at this kind of thing. Is the mindset that might be. But there definitely has been an uptick in people's views on how he's been handling. Still negative, I want to be clear. But the third point, and I think this is the most telling thing, and I thought Ailsa hit the nail on the head, is that the SNP have been able to compete with, in public opinion, against deeply unpopular Conservative government and now a deeply unpopular Labour government.
We ask about competence in a number of different ways, and we ask people to evaluate every party across a series of policy domains, because we think that asking which party do you think is most competent is just a proxy for how people are actually going to vote. And I think that other way of asking it is helpful because it helps us to understand not just who's in first, but who's in second, who's in third, and what's the gap between first and second. And I think that's important because we can understand the 2024 election not as everyone's evaluations of the competence of Scottish Labour going up, but in a situation in which everyone's competence evaluations were falling. Every party was perceived to be less competent at handling every policy domain. Labour's competence evaluations just fell least. They fell less than the others, right? So that's the 21 to 24 period, 21 to 23 period. And then if you look at the 23 to 25 period, part of the recovery of the SNP is not because evaluations of their competence have increased, but because in a context in which everyone's competence evaluations are still falling, the SNPs have fallen least. And that explains why Labour did well in 24. That explains why the SNP is doing well now. And actually, if you look at the most recent figures that we have in the poll, then there is absolutely a recovery in SNP competence evaluations. It's absolutely under John Swinney. There's been a levelling off in terms of the decline of government approval as well. But they've recovered themselves to the point of 2023. They've not yet recovered themselves to the point of 2021. So that's what I would say on competence. On leaders, we ask people to evaluate them on a scale of 0 to 10. And John Swinney is the most popular leader, but it is also the case that his average scores are below the midpoint of the scale. And then there's a tight cluster of leaders immediately after that. So it's not so much a popularity contest as you're just trying to hold yourself as close to the midpoint as possible. We're not in the days where, Nicola Sturgeon was getting average scores on a 0 to 10 scale of 7 or 8. But the last thing I would say about leader evaluations is the very high proportion of don't knows. Now, it's no surprise that Malcolm Offord had 70% of the respondents in the sample saying they didn't know who he was. He's fairly newly in the door. But there are similarly high levels of don't knows in the 50s and 60s for party leaders that have been there a very long time. Alex Cole-Hamilton has the next highest levels of don't knows, and he's not newly in the door. So I guess that's a question of how important leaders are to the way that people cast their ballots in this election.
Ailsa, I can't let you go without asking you about Canada. I've done a little bit on this in the past, but I cannot claim to be your level of expertise on this particular situation. If you look at reform in Canada, 1986, 87, I think, when they started, and if you look at Preston Manning and then Stephen Harper and what happened through the 90s and the Tory wipeout in 93 and all of that, I'm finding it difficult to see any differences at the moment between what happened in Canada and what's happening here right now with UK reform. And it took, 15 years between reform in Canada starting and effectively the United Right movement and the Conservative Party folding into the Canadian Alliance. It looks like it's going to take a little less here, but I'm just really interested in the comparisons and your thoughts about the comparisons between the two. I mean, even down to the narrative, the kind of Ottawa elite versus the West, which feels so similar to what Reform are saying here. I mean, Kemi Badenoch gets a lot of plaudits at the moment for performing well in the Commons, but it's not showing anything in the polls at all. And are they kidding themselves a little bit here, the Tories? I mean, it looks to me as though they're on the same path as the Progressive Conservatives were in Canada, and probably with the same outcome, where they effectively get swallowed by the bigger right-wing movement. I mean, am I wrong to see these things as being incredibly similar at this point?
Yeah, I mean, there are obvious parallels there. One is that there are two sets of regional alienation occurring within a state. So on the one hand, you had Reform in Canada as a representation of Western alienation at the same time as you had the rise of the Bloc Québécois. So the thing that made Reform so effective was that it was working in concert with a separatist Bloc Québécois that was contesting seats for the federal House of Commons. And that was really what had proven difficult for the Canadian Conservative Party. It was fighting two separate instances of regional alienation. And so the ingredient that's slightly different in a UK context is that the Conservative Party has never been relying on supports from that newly alienated component in England, and separately that consistently alienated component in Scotland. It lost Scotland long ago. And so it's not battling things on two fronts, it's battling them on one front. But the difference, of course, is also that England has a disproportionately large element of the electorate in a UK context. And that's not, it's more even if you're looking in terms of a Canadian electorate.
Ailsa, I feel like there's a whole other episode in Canadian politics and Scottish politics comparison, so we will come back to that in due course. For now, though, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Over the course of this election campaign, we're going to check in regularly with candidates across the country. We will hear from all parties. Today, we're going to start by hearing from Labour, the SNP and the Liberal Democrats. We'll start with Isla McCay, who is on the list in the Highlands and Islands for the Labour Party. Hello, Isla.
Oh, good morning.
Good to see you. And Lloyd Melville, who is a candidate for the SNP in Angus South. Hello, Lloyd.
Good morning. Nice to see you all.
It's great to see you both. Thank you so much for being with us. We just want a bit of a feel, really, for how this campaign is going. And then, the oldies on the call, Andy and Geoff, can reminisce about their days campaigning, which I think were in black and white. They were so long ago. Isla, shall we start with you? How are you finding the campaign so far?
I think for my first time being a candidate, I think it's such a rewarding experience, and it's so interesting to actually get out and about across the constituency and speak to voters. My constituency is Skylochaber and Badenoch, which spans a really diverse and vast swathe of the Highlands. So, you're speaking to folks in some very remote and interesting places. And it's been a fantastic experience just getting out and doing that and finding out what matters most to people. And with that kind of diversity across the area, the common themes that kind of tie everything together and that people feel across both the constituency, the wider region, and I'm sure Scotland as a whole with this election coming up, people are really thinking about the opportunity ahead of us. And it's been an interesting experience so far. Still feels like a long way to go, but
yeah. Well, it's only
going.
a couple of months. Can it feel rewarding even at this stage of campaign? I often think that it's such a run up to when you actually find out what the result of this thing. It's like the longest job application ever.
Yes, I have heard it described that way a few times, and I think that's definitely fitting because it's a long process. And we've been out. I was selected in September, and so from the end of last year through the winter, even though we face quite harsh winters here, still getting out, and it's a marathon, not a sprint. But the 2 months ahead are going to kind of kick up in intensity, I think. And it's been good to get out and speak to people before they kind of have switched on to there being an election, because folks aren't quite so polarised yet, possibly, and they're a bit more open to considering what issues are going to matter most to them when they're making that decision. So it's been worth putting the time in and getting out to folks early, and then over the next wee while, speaking to people a bit more with a bit more of a focus on the election, kind of persuading them about the choice that lies ahead.
Yeah. Lloyd, how are you finding the campaign? How's it going?
Yeah, much the same as what Isla has said. It's really good just to get around and speak to people. That's the thing I most enjoy about being involved in politics, is going and knocking on doors. Some people look at me like I'm mad when I tell them that, but it is definitely the best part of it. And like Isla, I was selected last year. I was actually selected in May last year, so
Really?
it will have been a full year of campaigning come election day, and I actually can't believe how quickly it's flown in. But on that kind of chord of agreeing with Isla, people are, I think, prepared to speak and to listen to parties even at this stage. It certainly feels different to the general election last year, which of course caught everyone by surprise, and then it was a bit frantic. Whereas this, I think, because of the long lead-in time, people really are thinking about the future, about what they want that to look like. Do they want to choose that themselves, or have these decisions made elsewhere? So it's been very interesting. I mean, I was actually out knocking doors last night. It's finally getting to the stage where we can actually knock doors in the evening for a significantly long period of time, which is brilliant. You don't have to do it every Saturday. So yeah, lots more of that ahead. And I've set myself the personal aim of knocking on every door in the constituency, which I know is impossible, but I'm going to give it a go anyway.
Really? Do you know how many doors that is, out of interest?
Well, I know that there's approximately 58,000 people in the constituency, Calum. So that should maybe give you an idea for how big a task that is. But I'm going to give it a go.
Yeah. Well, good
Isla,
luck to
you should try and knock on every
Andy,
door in Skye, Loch Aberdein, Beidnich. You'll be done by the 2031 election, I think.
I think I'm going to be lucky if my car survives this campaign as is. Like, I don't know how much further I can push it.
Really? That's hilarious. Andy, when you hear this, are you thinking fondly of your days campaigning?
Oh, most of my days campaigning were spent in a dark room with my head in my hands. To be honest with you, I wasn't really, I didn't, I didn't get out much. And what's interesting though, I did tell you, Lloyd, just thinking about you knocking on every door there, just gave me a thought, because we've just spoken earlier in the podcast to Ailsa Henderson, politics professor at Edinburgh, about some polling that she did, and her polling showed again that. Obviously, the SNP vote share is pretty strong, and the SNP are looking pretty strong in constituencies, but that the government is actually still not very popular. What are you hearing and seeing? I mean, the sort of theory from Ailsa was the government's not popular, but people are still voting SNP effectively because they're looking for that sort of strong Scottish message in a Holyrood election. Is that chime with what you're hearing when you're speaking to people?
I think it's important to say no government is perfect. And of course, the SNP has been in power for a long time. There are things that we need to improve. There's no doubt about that. But I think when looking at the options in front of people, yes, people do want a strong Scottish government led by John Swinney, who can stand up for Scotland and advance the cause of independence. That's certainly what I'm hearing on the doors. There's a lot of folk undecided, a lot of folk who might previously not have been in favour of independence or the SNP, looking at the mess down the road in Westminster and now coming to us and saying, well, maybe it's time to take a punt. One example of that, I spoke to a lifelong Labour voter last night who told me they would never vote Labour again because of the mess that's gone on down the road. And they said to me, maybe it is time to get away from it all and to strike our own chord as an independent country. And I think that's the kind of mood folk are in. Maybe things haven't always gone right, but we are trying to improve them and we are trying to offer a better future. And that's certainly the message that we're taking to the doorsteps in this election.
Isla, I feel like we need to give you a right of reply. But actually, there's an interesting kind of parallel, isn't there? Because Labour's in government at Westminster, and as Lloyd has been alluding to, isn't overly popular either. I wonder if that's something that's coming up in your conversations.
Far less than folks would like to think. I think the majority of conversations I have with voters are about the issues that actually affect them on a day-to-day basis, and that's whether they can access a GP appointment, the quality of the roads on their drive to work or to school, and the safety and delivery of education in those school settings as well. People are far more concerned with the matters that Holyrood has the power to decide, and that's what this election should be about. I think it does a disservice to voters and to the Scottish Parliament to frame it as something that's about Westminster when it isn't. It's about the choices that we can make in Holyrood that affect people on a daily basis.
If I can just reply
go
there,
on,
if
Lloyd.
that's all right. I just wanted to say I understand that point, Isla, and completely agree. What I was trying to get across there, though, was that these are things that voters have brought up with me independently. When I'm going and speaking to the doors, yes, you're absolutely right. People want to know what we're going to do about a GP appointment. They want to know what we're going to do about their roads, their schools. I'm very lucky in that I'm currently a councillor, and I've already done quite a lot on these things, and I've got more to do. But we can't ignore, and certainly I can't ignore the things that people are telling me. And when I've got folk bringing this stuff up independently, I think it's worthy of note.
In what can only be described as a disturbing fact, Geoff Aberdein is the only person on this call, I believe, who has won a national election in the past, albeit not as a candidate. It's worth highlighting. Geoff, what are your words of wisdom?
2 elections, not one. But you're right to say I wasn't myself on the doorsteps seeking election, but I did go around every constituency. So I have been in every constituency in Scotland on more than one occasion. I'm not going to get into the politics just yet. I think we're inviting our guests on again throughout the campaign. Maybe we can have more of a charged debate, but I thought they both equipped themselves very well there. So they've got the lines and they articulated them well. So good for you. I think one thing that I reflect on is I think today's politicians or aspiring politicians overplay social media. And this might sound a bit controversial, but in my time, there was no social media. There was no ability to take a video and post it on a network and then think that your job is done. Both of them have talked about the importance of a ground game, and that's really refreshing to hear, because it's only when you have that face-to-face interaction that you can persuade people, you can change minds, you can really advance your case. And I've got a fear, actually, with our senior politicians and with leaders as well. They think a wee video on social media, that's your job done. I sense you're speaking to a bubble. And actually going back to the hard graft of knocking on doors, going to supermarkets, going into high streets as much as possible is so important, because people want to know who they're voting for and get a sense for the person in person. And I think it's refreshing to hear both of them talk about that, because that's something I think a mistake is being made just now, and maybe a misunderstanding of how people react.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. Isla, how busy is it going to get then? Just by way of conclusion, and we'll catch up with you guys through the campaign. What does your sort of schedule look like? Is there a typical day or like a typical weekend? Just because some people listening to this will have no concept of what campaigning actually looks and feels like for a candidate.
So a typical day for me is still 8 to 5:30 in the office in my day job, and then I come home and I will be on the emails and planning out press and social media content and where my next door knocking session is back at my desk when I get home from work. So it's still pretty full on from this point. And on the weekends, Fridays and Saturdays, getting out and door knocking whenever possible. Often that might be a quite significant journey. What I'm trying to do is the logistics of campaigning in the Highlands mean you've got to be quite efficient about getting around the place. So, it's 3 hours from where I live in the east of the constituency to Portree in Skye, and that's not an easy road either. So you've got to go out there and you make the most of it when you're there, and you speak to as many folks as you can. And on the plus side, I think I win for, or I feel quite strongly that I have the most beautiful scenery of every constituency. I'm sure everyone thinks they do, but Skye, Lochaber and Badenoch has got that covered. So your weekends, door knocking, the social media stuff is important, filming a bit of that as well in different places. And I think from here until the election, it's going to be trying to cover as much ground as possible. And then once we're into the short campaign, it'll be much more kind of full-time campaign mode, getting out and speaking to people in different places, meeting with different communities and hearing about the issues that matter most to them. And also some of the really interesting things that happen here. So I'll say one of my next visits I've got planned is to the Isle of Egg, where I can learn about to learn about community ownership and community-driven development. And there's some really exciting and interesting conversations to be had with folks about what we can do, not just about the challenges that they're facing, but about the opportunities ahead of us in the Scottish Parliament election. So keen for it to be positive in that regard as well. And I'm really looking forward to getting out and seeing people in all these fantastic places who are doing such hard work for their communities.
Lloyd, just a final one for you. When you're out and about knocking all the 50-odd thousand doors and whatever, do you bump into other candidates? What's it like when you kind of encounter somebody who is, a rival and opposition to you in this election? Is it quite friendly, or is it, I don't know, how does it feel?
Well, it hasn't happened yet.
Fair enough.
I mean, so
they're all hiding, are they? They're not knocking on all the doors.
Well, I wouldn't say that, Calum. I'm sure that they've got just as ambitious a door knocking target as I do. I'm lucky actually in that. So my Labour opposition is actually my ward colleague on the council.
Oh, right, okay.
And we get on incredibly well. We work together really well on lots of ward issues. And we've got a really good relationship. So I'm hopeful that there will be no animosity there if we come across each other on the doors. We've only just now got a Conservative candidate who was a previous councillor who I've never met, so I don't know. And we obviously will expect to get more parties going forward. But my general rule when it comes to coming across campaigners is just to smile, be friendly, wish them well, have a good day and crack on, because we've both got a job to do.
Geoff?
Oh, I was going to just finish with a wee anecdote for you, and I'm not suggesting you replicate this behaviour. And before I do, I just want to say, look, I'm not a dinosaur. I do appreciate the importance of social media, okay? But I'm just saying, focus on the ground game. Focus on the door knocking. There's a really funny story with when Alex Salmond was challenging Albert Macquarie, the Buchan Bulldog from Buchan, 1987. And the Tories were sending up quite a lot of people from the Central Belt and indeed from England to campaign, because they knew that, Salmond was a big challenger in the constituency. So what the SNP activists did, they knew the road they'd be coming into the constituency, and they changed all the signposts. So they ended up going the wrong places to campaign. It was, I tell you, that was a toxic battle, I'm told. There was almost fisticuffs in the Peterhead High Street at one point as well. But changing the signposts, all these activists went to the wrong constituency. I thought it was brilliant. Genius.
I'm not sure you get away with that these days.
No, wasn't like that in my day. Right, hey, Lloyd and Isla, thank you both so much. It's really nice to see you today, and we'll check in with you again on the podcast as well. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I respect anyone who stands for election for anything, because it is an arduous task. So it is, you've got respect from us, and we'll speak again soon. But for now, thank you both very much. Thanks for your time. Let's also welcome to the Holyrood Sources podcast, Sanne Dijkstra-Downie, who is standing for the Liberal Democrats in Edinburgh Northern. Sanne, welcome to Holyrood Sources. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
No, it's great to have you. How are you finding the campaign so far? By the way, is this your first campaign for election?
So it's my first parliamentary campaign. I am a councillor in Edinburgh at the moment, and I've done that for 4 years. But yeah, first time standing for Parliament.
And how are you finding it? Is it quite different to running for a council seat?
So I was selected for this seat over a year ago. So for the past year, we've been out 2-3 nights a week speaking to lots of people across the constituency. And as you can imagine, you have a lot of different conversations with people, which makes this really, really interesting. The interesting part for me is I'm running in a new constituency called Edinburgh Northern, which currently doesn't have one MSP. It's made up of different parts of different constituencies. So as you can imagine, you have very different conversations in different parts of it. But the great thing of going out night after night speaking to people is you're not just talking about the election. You're not just talking about boundary changes. You're talking about local issues, things that bother people. People have an opportunity to talk to you about what they want to talk about. And that can be anything from really, really local issues like the state of their roads to the state of the world. I had a conversation last night with a lady who was really worried about Trump and the environment. So that's the great thing about showing up on people's doorsteps. You just get the whole range of experiences. And I think by and large, people really appreciate somebody taking the time to knock on their door and ask them what it is that they want to talk about.
Yeah, it's fascinating that, because here we are a couple of months out. Are you kind of on doorsteps most nights of the week? How much time does campaigning take up?
Well, as Liberal Democrats, we don't take any election for granted. So we spend a lot of time out in the doors. So at the moment, I'm out 4 nights a week with my team. So it's not just me. I've got some really great people around me who come out with me night after night. And as you can imagine, over the winter, that means a lot of a lot of dark nights, some very wet nights, and as the nights get lighter, it's a more pleasant experience. But I think people do actually appreciate it even more when you're standing there and it's raining and it's cold, but you've taken the time to come and knock on somebody's door. So it's very time consuming, but it's incredibly rewarding and necessary.
Yeah, fair. I think one of the critiques, of the Lib Dems at a kind of Westminster level is what is their relevance? What are they for? What are they doing? Back in the day, they were perhaps a kind of third-party challenger. In this kind of multi-party world we live in, the Lib Dems there may be struggling for relevance. But often on the podcast, we talk about the Lib Dems and how important they may be after this Scottish parliamentary election, and how they actually may play a crucial part either in a formal or informal coalition with whichever party turns out to have the most seats. I'm just quite intrigued, I suppose, as to what you pick up from people when it comes to, you introduce yourself and you say, I'm running to be Liberal Democrat MSP. Do they respond with a kind of awareness that there could be a pivotal role for the Lib Dems, or do you find it difficult to distinguish from that kind of national brand where it's a bit like there's so many parties, perhaps the Lib Dems get crowded out a bit at Westminster now?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. So what I would say in the constituency that I'm running for, there is Lib Dem representatives at one level or another in all of that constituency, whether that's at local level or at parliamentary level. And people see that we are really focused on being really good local representatives. So we keep in touch with people, we knock on their doors, we fix things. We're very, very solutions orientated. And I think that is part of our appeal, part of our brand, if you will, that really, really resonates with people on the doorstep. And that makes having some of these conversations easier. Look, I'm from the Netherlands myself. I come from a political tradition where people have to work in coalition. They have to work together, either formally or informally. It's something that feels quite natural to me. And it's something that I've done as a councillor as well on Edinburgh City Council, where we work with different parties in different configurations on an issue by issue basis often. So for me, this idea of working with other parties is not alien. I think where we agree, we are happy to work together. I think people are not really thinking so much, when I'm having these one-to-one conversations about, who's going in coalition with whom, that doesn't really resonate at the moment. I think that is something that we talk about in the political bubble. But I think when you're talking to people on the doorstep, it is really more about what is it that you can do for me as my local representative? How can you help me? But there is also undeniably an appetite for change and a recognition that we have an SNP government that's been in power for nearly 19 years. I think people feel that they have run out of ideas. They want to see a change. And what my pitch to them is I can be a really positive change. You don't need to go to extremes of nationalism or extreme right in order to get that change. You can get a really, positive, local, practical change with the Liberal Democrats in this constituency.
And just finally, for this kind of first conversation that we'll have, Sanne, throughout this campaign, is it fun? Is campaigning fun? It's something I've never done. I don't imagine I will ever do it. The whole thought of running for an election fills me with absolute anxiety, I have to say, and trepidation. Do you enjoy it? Is there something enjoyable about campaigning?
Absolutely. I do enjoy it. It's not always easy. And I'm not somebody that has always been particularly comfortable in public life. It's definitely something that you get better at as you do it. The best part of this is being part of a team. You don't do this alone. It would be horrible if you had to run for election alone. You do it with a team of people around you. And one of the great things about being a Liberal Democrat is that I have people around me who all really care so much about the things that they're trying to do for their own communities and in the wider world. We're talking about improving education, improving healthcare, tackling cost of living for people, all of these things that are important to people and that we are really, really committed to helping people with. Being surrounded by people who feel the same way as you do is really inspiring and absolutely fun.
Thank you so much to Lloyd and to Isla and to Sanne. They are 3 of 6 candidates that we'll be following on the podcast over the course of this election campaign from different parts of the country, representing all the main parties as well, of course. So stay with us and you'll get a feel for what it's actually like for those who are campaigning over these next couple of months. Thank you also to Ailsa Henderson. Thanks to Geoff and Andy, the dinosaurs. No, they're not the dinosaurs. The absolute foundation of this podcast, of course. We will be back in your podcast feed next week. Let me just tell you once again to join our mailing list, because I will actually be sending you an email this week about an event that you will want to be a part of before the election. All right, go and sign up at holyroodsources.com. Just pop in your email address and you will get that email before the end of this week. On next week's episode, we're bringing together a discussion on education. We've got teachers, we've got experts, we've got analysts standing by to assess the situation regarding the Scottish education system and where the parties stand, what could change in Scottish education beyond the election in May. So make sure you subscribe to this podcast, either on your podcast app or on YouTube, and we will talk to you again next week.